Hi, welcome back to Elections Weekly. I'm your host, Drew Levanti, and this is a show where we take a look at the week ahead through the lens of electional astrology, contemplating the astrology of the moment and aligning our agency with the flow of the planets. I'm coming to you from a very different place this time. Let me take off my sunglasses. I feel like that's more approachable, but it's also so sunny because I'm in freaking California. I just moved to the Bay Area. I actually moved to San Francisco, but I'm currently at my brother's house just for the day. I had to like come pick up my microphone. I'm in a third house perfection and I'm seeing a lot of my brother, which is super cool. If you know about what the third house is, you probably know that it's about siblings and also local travel. So today I took the Larkspur ferry from San Francisco out into the Bay and out to Sonoma County where my brother lives. So it's been a really great time moving here so far. Still kind of finding the perfect place that I want to end up long term, but it's been a whirlwind of eclipse season so far, as you can probably tell. And anybody out there who has a fixed rising sign or like a lot of placements in fixed signs, you're gonna really feel this eclipse season coming in hot because there's a lot of action in fixed signs. That would be Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, Aquarius. All of those signs are just so busy right now with eclipses taking place in Taurus and Scorpio. And they can be really destabilizing times, but also times when doors open for you and you kind of get plugged into a new way of living. And so I hope that for those of you out there that like that path is going well for you. We have some exciting elections for this week, highlighting Jupiter in Aries, which all my cardinal sign people and definitely all my Aries out there, my fellow Aries brethren, we're going to get super into. Before that, I want to let you know about Initiate. There are currently a little over 20 people registered for the course, looking to have maybe roughly five more people join the course. So if you're interested in electional astrology, doing this for yourself and developing a devotional practice around electional astrology, bringing electional astrology into your contemplation of the planets, this is the course for you. So we're going to get started on June 26th. Registration is still open. It will be open until those spots fill. So I would love to have you. And, we've got some stuff happening even before June 26th. So you don't want to wait until the last minute. We're going to have a community forum open in early June. We're going to have some meetups before the actual live courses start. It's going to be live sessions. There's going to be some pre-recorded stuff. We're going to have lots of communication with the rest of the class through the forum because electional astrology is so interactive and it asks for so much attention. And the way that I'm teaching it is really about like using electional astrology on a daily basis and not even necessarily like using it for certain outcomes, but it's also like you have to watch and learn. You have to watch how this stuff plays out. And so what this course is offering you is not only like a technical foundation in electional astrology, but it's also like how to like look at a chart and be able to tell the story of what is happening in that chart in a very practical way. Like who are the different characters, who are the players, who's interacting. Like this stuff literally plays out in terms of like literal people will stand for planets or planets will stand for people or they'll stand for places or ideas or things. And so being able to dissect the chart in that way is super helpful and will just totally animate the way that you read charts in general within electional astrology, outside of electional astrology. So that sounds interesting to you, hop over to the links and check it out. And definitely feel free to email me with questions if you still have about the course. Okay, time for our charts, May 10th. And this is the day that Jupiter ingresses into Aries. However, for this chart, Jupiter is not yet in Aries, not quite. And so it's interesting because this chart, which gives us a Virgo rising, about 7 degrees of Virgo rising, Mercury rules the ascendant, it's retrograde, just having stationed retrograde on this very day, and it's on the midheaven. And it's the hour of Jupiter, and Jupiter's about to head into Aries. So this is a really interesting chart. We're looking at a situation where you have to get ready to go back over what you've already done, right? So these retrograde themes are really highlighted in this chart because the ruler of the ascendant, that Virgo rising ruled by that Mercury retrograde, that Mercury retrograde is giving us all these retrograde themes. And so it's important with this one to not necessarily be starting something new. It might be like putting into practice that which you have had a lot of ideas about, right? So I feel like this also speaks to the shift from Jupiter in a mutable water sign in Pisces to Jupiter about to enter a cardinal fire sign, where there's so much more emphasis in that Mars ruled Aries that Jupiter is about to go into. There's so much more emphasis on action and putting ideas into action, finding faith through action, allowing actions to inspire faith. What good is it if you can't do it? So much of it with Aries comes down to what is practically actionable and like, how can I put this into practice? Practice. Like literally, practice is like a funny word for Aries too, because I feel like it doesn't come into the popular conversation around Aries because, you know, we think about like impulsivity and like all guns blazing and just going for it all in, which there's definitely like an element of Aries to that. But if you have Aries energy, you will know that it is not always that simple. When you have Aries energy in your chart, it's also about this practice. It's about trial and error, because when you go in impulsively, when you go in without, you know, thinking ahead and you're just going purely on instinct, you're going to fail a lot. And this is something that people with Aries stuff understand, is like this power of failure, and like how willing are you to get up again after, you know, like how willing are you to just take it as an experience, right? And I think Jupiter as a planet that has so much to do with like experience and wisdom and like knowing through doing, I feel like Jupiter in Aries like has this special power of a self-belief, you know, like self-belief, believing that even if you did fall down, it's like not that big a deal, and it's actually like part of the growth process. So with this Jupiter being in the 7th in this particular chart, I really like this from the perspective of being able to maybe model yourself after somebody else who you've witnessed have this this sense of self-belief and this ability to grow through trials. With Jupiter conjunct, you know, Mars is pretty prominent in this chart, being that it is the next aspect of the moon. So the moon will oppose Mars here. And then we've also got, you know, Jupiter is also conjunct Mars. But Mars here, you know, Mars in Pisces wants it all. Like Mars in Pisces, it doesn't want to be contained. It doesn't want its efforts or its ambitions to be contained. It really wants to go all the way. And so having this energy in the 7th house does describe like the kinds of people that you might be interacting with. Like maybe these people are very Piscean in the sense that they're dreamy, but they're also kind of assertive, and there's a fire deep inside of them in the way that, you know, like the water, like the ocean will rumble if there's this underwater volcano coming up, just as like a natural image to give you there. It's like the fire is down there and it's making some stuff happen, but what exactly is happening? So there's this like kind of this fire of Mars, like kind of behind the surface of a more gentle exterior of the water, or maybe like, yeah, subtle movements in the water that are inspiring you into action. And so that's the interesting thing about the relationship between this Mercury on the midheaven. So this Mercury is like, if you're taking action with this chart, that Mercury is you. That Mercury is you. All this other stuff that I've been talking about with like Mars and Jupiter, that's very much like energy that you'll experience with this election through others, whether that's like the way that you interact with those others or the energy that those people are bringing toward you, and that in some ways you get to participate in that because of their presence. In a way, it doesn't mean that it's like from one of you or the other, but it's just the way that the relating happens. And so these energies in the 7th house in Pisces with Jupiter and Mars are actually like casting this, we could say the technical term is casting a ray to Mercury, but we could maybe think of it as like casting a spell. Like this Mercury is a bit lost. Planets in the middle of their stations, they get loud and disorderly. And Mercury, when it's disorderly, can be quite frenetic, quite chaotic. And with Mars and Jupiter both looking up to Mercury on the midheaven, it's like the expectations that other people have for the mercurial things that you're going to be doing. So like for me, for example, this will align with me preparing the course in more detail for everybody. So I have made these, I've put these structures into place. You know, we do see that Saturn here is also getting ready to station in this chart. Putting these structures into place, and now like I'm going to be communicating with people in the course more. We're going to be getting ready for the live sessions to start and be sending out videos and sending out information. And so all of these things that I've like planned are now going to get put into practice. And so this is often what happens when planets move from direct to very slow to retrograde. It's like that retrograde process is actually a process of implementation. You can be whizzing, you can be going super fast. Like this is what Mercury does. Mercury ends up going super fast and then it has to slow down. And so when a planet goes fast, it's like having a lot of ideas, and it's aspirational, it's inspired to do things. And then when it slows down, it's like, whoa, okay, like what is actually within my capacity? So there's a way in which this Mercury is kind of gauging capacity, like gauging what is actually possible. And you know, I really, one thing that I like about this Mercury, and the reason, like usually I'm not electing things for y'all where there's a retrograde planet ruling the ascendant. However, this Mercury is actually in between the aspects of benefics. So its most recent aspect was a sextile with Venus, and its next aspect is going to be a sextile with Jupiter. And because of that, it shows that despite this retrograde motion, there is so much support around it, support in the past, support in the future, support in front, support behind. It's great to have people watching your back, you know? And so this is a lot of what this chart speaks to me. You know, anytime that Mars is prominent in a chart, I'm naturally a very martial person, like being an Aries, being a Scorpio rising, and I have a really good relationship with Mars. So just, if you're somebody who maybe struggles more with Mars, or that relationship is still kind of new for you in terms of making it one that is comfortable for you, I think that, this chart would then become an opportunity to kind of cultivate that relationship a little more, because Mars is very prominent here. So just keep that in mind, and sometimes that can show up as anger or disputes, or I feel like in Pisces too, there could be like disappointments. Yeah. I've been very rosy about this chart, even though it's like not like the technically most sound chart, but I think it's exciting nonetheless. And so I think with that, we'll move on to the 11th. Love this chart too. I chuckle because the moon is still opposite Mars, but I'm kind of like, yeah, okay, cool. Another thing with moon opposite Mars in general is this thing about physical safety. So, sometimes moon Mars aspects can, especially hard aspects, can indicate like compromising physical situations. So if for the Tuesday chart or the Wednesday chart, if you are doing something where there's like physical risk involved, I would definitely steer clear of that, or be doing some major Mars appeasement, just asking for Mars for a little bit of help, and not hindrance. So anyway, Wednesday, we've got 9:52 a.m. approximately. We're looking at, this is the May 11th chart, Cancer rising. The moon rules the ascendant. Got Cancer rising, moon rules the ascendant in Virgo. And so this Virgo moon, in my location, it's past the aspect to Mars. In most of your locations, it will not yet be past the aspect to Mars. And so that does make this one a little bit tricky for you. The reason that I actually chose this election is because it is the hour of Jupiter. And so what I would really recommend this for, rather than like a full kind of like I'm doing something in the world kind of election, starting first as like a devotional moment of tuning into Jupiter and Aries, because we are looking at it just after the ingress. It's at 0008 in my location. For some of you, it'll be even earlier, like right at that ingress. And so make sure it's Jupiter hour. And, we've got two benefics in the same sign. And that is an occasion for, identifying support from individuals, benefactors, people who are potentially helpful also see this Sun North Node in the 11th house, which also has to do with benefactors. And so thinking about like nobody does anything on their own, even as an Aries, it's so hard to say that, but it's true. Like we all come at things with help, and recognizing and appreciating it and feeding that appreciation, not taking things for granted. When Jupiter makes this fresh ingress into a fire sign, I think it can be very clarifying about like where the support is coming from. Pisces, it's like, oh, it comes from everywhere. It comes from the universe, right? Like all of this greater benefic stuff like wealth and camaraderie and the support of a larger community. And so when Jupiter goes from that dreamy Pisces where support is kind of everywhere, we're going into a place where support might be a little bit individuated, or we might feel like we have a greater sense of exactly who we are to be helped and to reciprocate that that jovial nature. Like this is what I have, this is what I'm showing up with, this is me. And yeah, there's something very appreciative. I think that like people who embody Jupiter in Aries, I think tend to like thanks. Yeah, I'm thinking about my brother a lot. I'm like at my brother's house. He has Jupiter and Aries in his third house, so it's like kind of a planet that represents me in a way. Yeah, so this is a Jupiter thing. Basically, there are prayers to Jupiter. You can maybe write your own prayer to Jupiter. Like, what is the relationship between faith and action, hope, belief, and action, or like one thing that I think about a lot with Aries is like the ability to sustain that fire. Like, this is one of the things about Aries is it's very passionate and it can really go hard. Like how long can it sustain that? Jupiter is a moderating influence. We hear so much about Jupiter and excess, Jupiter and going overboard. That's Jupiter out of balance. Jupiter's like, this is something that we get especially from, I would say, Renaissance astrology. It's an influence that brings things that are too much, brings them down, and things that are not enough, brings them up. And so to live, whatever that means for you, like it's always context specific, but there is this way that Jupiter in Aries specifically is going to have that moderating, balancing influence on self. Do you have to be the star of the party? Or can you be one of the crowd who blends in, but then has their moment? Like, I'm talking about my life right now, which is good. I'm excited for Jupiter in Aries, and I'm excited for what can come through with this chart. I hope that everybody tunes into Jupiter in Aries, because I think it's a really, especially for cardinal sign people, for Aries people, for even fire sign people, like this is a very clarifying influence for us to work with. So with that, let's move on to 12th. All right, Thursday, very similar chart here. It's a morning chart, so we're 9:49 a.m. approximately. We're looking for Jupiter to be conjunct the midheaven. And what's super cool about this day, we've had a few of these come up where it's the day of Jupiter and the hour of Venus, and both of these guys are up at the top of the chart. And I think that we've had these in Pisces so far, but this is the first such Thursday Venus hour election that has had both benefics and Aries. Yeah, and so my experience with the Pisces ones was very much about like inclusivity and like it all goes. Like I can connect with anybody, and for me, moving to a new city on the water, that's been very much my energy, just like open to anything. And I think that still will be my energy to a certain extent, but there's also like a pursuit, there's a search or a looking for that which lights one's own fire individually. it's great to mind meld and to spirit meld and to just be in a space with people and to share that divine aqueous substance of Pisces, that connective juice that just makes us feel like we're all a part of something. Jupiter in Aries, Venus in Aries, these energies are a little bit different. These energies are about making it yours and doing what you want to do personally. And so how to do that in a Venusian way? I mean, it's interesting. Venus in Aries is, the sign of its detriment, but there is a small section of Aries where Venus has another kind of dignity. Venus here is at 11 degrees of Aries, which is in Venus's terms. There's all these different systems for evaluating a planet's self-sufficiency or autonomy, its ability to thrive in an environment. And so what I love about Venus in Aries in this part, it's to make its own rules. It gets to decide what it wants. The terms are about setting the terms. It's like knowing the language. It's like if you go, like Venus in Aries is very much in a foreign country, but Venus can speak the language. And there might be a slight accent, like people can tell that Venus isn't from there, but there's also at the same time something alluring about Venus in this location. We see this moon in Libra, speaking of place, at the bottom of the chart, very close to the IC. The moon is in between Venus and Jupiter. Venus and Jupiter are really giving the moon a lot to work with. It feels like a dance. It feels like the moon here is dancing with Venus and Jupiter. And how would the moon in Libra dance? Like there's this attention to form, attention to comportment, behavior, the grace, sense of grace, moving toward Venus, where Venus wants to receive the moon into its arms because Venus is, the ruler of the moon here. So, this is an interesting chart for this kind of non-duality of public and private, right? So we have the public at the IC and we have the private at the IC and the public on the MC, and we have these planets moving across that axis. And so what the moon here speaks to is this foundational grace. And when you have grace in your foundation, when your feet are firm, all of the embellishment that can come on top of that, all of the movement and the flamboyance, the fiery flamboyance of this Jupiter and Venus and Aries, how much that can flourish on top of this graceful foundation. Maybe that foundation is home. Maybe this is an election that has to do with home for you. Maybe that foundation is something more emotional and sensitive. And cultivating that, that's a word that I love for the IC, is cultivation. Because it takes cycles. Cultivation isn't something that happens, it's not just about one season, right? Like there are many cycles, many repetitions that we go through with our fourth house stuff, telling and retelling these stories from the past that are very much a part of us, but are also very distant. And so maybe this chart is also about reincorporating certain stories and making them a part of our grace. Okay. 5:13. A Libra rising. The moon is still in Libra. 4:46 p.m. approximately. We're looking to have Venus on the descendant here, so that should be approximately 12 degrees of Libra rising. Venus sitting at 12 degrees of Aries on the descendant. It's a day of Venus and the hour of the moon. We find the moon in Venus's sign in the first house. So lots of layers here. Distance, healthy distance. I see the moon here trining Saturn in the fifth house. Fifth house things being pleasure, recreation, enjoyment, fun. Saturn is quite slow at this moment. And so fifth house things have a certain hesitance or lethargy or pause to them. There's a pause. With Venus on the descendant in Aries, the sign of its detriment, how can you be with from a distance? How can you be all in about somebody else being themselves? Do we have to really mirror each other? Do we have to really do the same thing, be the same person, wear the same clothes? Or is there a spirit of friendship, a Jupiter of friendship, something that makes the relationship or the relationships, the way of relating coherent across difference? That difference and individuality are actually an asset in relationships. That without this friction, without this head-butting, ramming energy of Aries, would we know who we are? We need this friction to individuate. And individuation doesn't stop the moment that we're with others. Go on to 514. So we're looking at our Saturday chart now, another Libra rising. So, okay, we're heading into eclipse season now. Or, I mean, we've been in eclipse season this whole time, but we're heading into the moon in Scorpio where it will be eclipsed. So that's something to keep in mind for this. We're looking at 3:41 p.m., 0 degrees of Libra rising. Venus, once again, ruling the chart in the 7th. And Jupiter is sitting right on the descendant in its planetary hour. So this is the planetary hour of Jupiter. Double check that in your location, as planetary hours can vary slightly by location. The moon in Scorpio. It's not making any applying aspects within its next 13 or next day of motion. So the moon is a little bit out of the picture here, which is kind of why I went for this. This chart has many of the same themes as the previous one, except it's a little feistier. Moon's in Scorpio instead of in Libra. We're less concerned with balance and we're more concerned with going all the way. Scorpio energy. So if that's for you, this might be a good chart for you. Could be a decent chart for financial support. Actually, you know, this lunation, this full moon eclipse in Scorpio is happening along the 2nd, 8th house axis, which has to do with resources, our resources and the resources of others. And that 7th house does look quite delicious, doesn't it? So maybe the other is very supportive here. Maybe the other has a lot of resources, a lot to offer. You know, the co-presence of Jupiter with this Venus in the 7th does indicate support coming from somewhere. We do see that Jupiter rules the 6th and the 3rd. And so the 6th, this could be some kind of employment situation that is ending up being very helpful, where, or could even be an employee, or there's some kind of like contract across a power dynamic, with the ruler of the 6th being here in the 7th. And with the ruler of the 3rd and the 7th, it could also be a sibling or a close friend or something of that nature. It could be either one of those 3rd or 6th house situations. It could be both. And so that is providing support for the ruler of the ascendant. 3rd house could also be neighborhood, or it could be like community. 3rd and 6th house both have like a grassroots energy to them, both the 3rd and the 6th. And so I would consider that a main source of support for this election, given that Jupiter rules those houses and is supporting Venus, who rules the ascendant. So that's a little bit behind the curtain of this one, the Scorpio moon really getting into the nitty-gritty of this chart. We'll leave it for there right now. And then our Sunday chart. Another Libra rising, another Jupiter on the descendant, very similar energy here. So pretty much everything that I just said for that one also goes here. Here we've got the hour of Venus instead of the hour of Jupiter. So bringing a little bit more focus on the quality of Venus in Aries, which is very independent, very fierce, very unbothered a lot of times, you know, like Venus in Libra, the opposite of Venus in Aries. Venus in Libra is so into, you know, the rules of conduct, or the code of conduct, and the norms of behavior, those conventions that we all agree to abide by. And Venus in Aries is like, not for me. So if that's you, if that's the energy that you're looking to embody here, or if you're in a position of if you're in a position where you just can't follow the rules because of your situation, like, you know, sometimes you have to step outside the box a little bit in order to make things work for you. And if that's you too, this could be a chart for you. Now, I do want to say the moon is in Scorpio where it's fallen. It's conjunct the south node in the second house. There's definitely some money drop in this chart. Money, money, money. Where's it coming from? Where's it going? And the moon square Saturn. What are the rules around it? What can I spend it on? What can I not spend it on? What boxes do I have to check in order to get it? These are all things that come in with this eclipse in general. So, you know, the themes of this eclipse are very much about resources, restrictions on resources, and, you know, it's interesting that, you know, Jupiter is in Aries at this time. Like the benefics, unfortunately, are not looking at the eclipse axis. Venus and Jupiter are both off axis from the eclipse, which, and Saturn is very much squaring it. So, you know, great endings, great beginnings, all that good stuff with eclipses. This is a 6-month cycle, so there's no need to like stress about this particular day. But as I often say, I do like to take it pretty easy on eclipses. Although, Jesus, the last solar eclipse, it was in my 7th house, and the night before the solar eclipse, you know, the solar eclipse happened in the morning here. The night before the solar eclipse, I went to a dance performance with somebody who I've been seeing, and it was, you know, it's the 7th house eclipse for me, and it was great. Had a great time. Went to a party after, stayed over. Next morning, like as the eclipse perfected, I was like saying goodbye, and it was a great moment. And so yeah, I mean, like shit happens during eclipses. Don't just like close your curtains because the eclipse is happening. Like, I mean, if you want to close the curtains, that's cool. You know, baleful rays and all that. That's a Twitter joke. If you're not on Astro Twitter, you should get on it because we talk a lot about baleful rays during eclipse season. And yeah, like just to say, I had a great experience during this last eclipse, and we do want to be energetically sensitive around these times, and we want to be careful with our energy, keep the energy tight, because it can get a little bit, it's like, it fills up a space easily. Like the energy can really shoot somewhere, and then it's, oh, where'd that go? Like it's gone now. And so keeping it tight, keeping it here, and working with it. You know, you can dance with it just like you can dance with the moon, but what is it like to dance with a moon that is blood red? How do you have to what kind of consciousness do you have to tune into in order to make that align? How to I feel like I'm gonna start these are gonna turn into dance videos pretty soon. Oh man. So yeah, this is our Sunday chart. Monday, 5:16, we're looking at 9:31 a.m. Roughly, the point of this chart is to have Jupiter hour. So this is at the very end of Jupiter hour, my location. So don't just copy the time. You got to go and check the planetary hour. There's lots of, I would recommend Time Nomad for that. I do not trust the website planetaryhours.net. It's not accurate. So yeah, just little guidance on resources there. Time Nomad, great app for planetary hours. Astrogold also works. All right, yeah, it's a Sagittarius moon. Moon's trine Jupiter. Hopefully, I guess people in the Western Hemisphere will be able to have the moon in Sag for this election. If you have the moon in Scorpio, it's honestly not ideal, because yeah, it's just not. But having the moon in Sag is great. I feel like this you know, there's the eclipse, and then there's what comes after the eclipse. And sometimes people talk about the eclipse hangover. I definitely had one of those when the moon was in Gemini recently after the solar eclipse in Taurus. This eclipse hangover is going to be much different. This is like, so you know how like the only cure for some things is like to do more of that thing? Yeah. This is a very electrified moon in Sagittarius. Jupiter, the ruler of Sagittarius, has just gone into a fire sign. It's just gone into Aries. There is so much passion and possibility here. So much sense of what could be and what is to come. You know, the moon riding that high of fullness where it was just eclipse and sort of like, you know, the eclipsed moons, you know, there's darkness there, there's shadow, and then emerging into this fire sign, this bright fire sign, and trining both benefics and Aries. There's this triumphant feeling to this. And so if you were like, say you were looking to slide into somebody's DMs, it would be best to not do it during the Scorpio moon and to do it during the Sagittarius moon instead. But you know, many things that one would elect are kind of like sliding into DMs if you really come down to it. So yeah, maybe just not the eclipse charts, and maybe just wait for this one. I think the Libra moon and the Sagittarius moon elections this week are really dope. So yeah, hang out for those, and maybe the Scorpio ones, you just like see what happens and you dance with that shadow a little bit. I will be. Oh yeah, that Scorpio moon. The Scorpio moon's on the weekend, so it should be should be fun times. I'm not going to be staying inside. That's all I'm saying. But everybody will do what they're meant to do. That's kind of the thing about eclipse season. It's like you just gotta let go and let God a little bit. Thanks for coming in for Elections Weekly, everybody. I'll be back next week. Now that I'm not moving, well, I mean, there was no show last week because I had just gotten here and I lost my voice. You know how it is, yelling over loud music. But yeah, I lost my voice, and so I didn't do the show. I was going to do it in writing, and like, I don't know how to do these in writing. I just talk. So yeah, things are getting settled, kind of. Eclipse season's not over. Excited to keep sharing with y'all. And I'll see you next week.